Great. Well, thank you so much, and appreciate such a overwhelming response from the market here. I assume it's really got to do with the fact that we've all had them over the course of our professional careers. Those epic pitch fails that now make your palms sweat, even at the very idea of your next big agency pitch. Today's session is really about talking through the ability to select the right pitch over every pitch, and being a little more ruthless with yourself to avoid the sweaty hands. Being ruthless with yourself and your team on the criteria that you're using to evaluate the pitch, the resources that you put toward it, and I think some of the best horror stories really come from the approach that you've taken to participate in those where you really do have a right to win the business. So through some of the real life examples that Scott will be talking through, we'll demonstrate how some of the most successful sales reps avoid those epic fails when pitching agencies from day one. I'm going to kick things off with talking a little bit about the criteria. I put it into two buckets. Really your financial opportunity with the pitch now and in the future, usually two different things, making sure that you really have a good understanding of what both of those functions are. And then being ruthless with your financial investment to win that business. I'm going to show you a little bit of a quadrant that one of your peers has been using for a number of years successfully in this space. Then it comes down to the known key issue, and I've underlined the known piece there, really understanding the business case as to why the business is up the pitch, where you fit in, and most importantly, after that, the impact that action against bringing you and your solution into the equation is going to have. Most importantly, in my experience, it's actually the impact of doing nothing. I've found that the most compelling area for discussion and for really getting to the root cause of why comes in the enforcement and a really good understanding of the inaction and what impact that will have with no decision. And finally, the sense of urgency. What's the benefit of doing and implementing this action now rather than later? Is there a financial impact between action and inaction, or taking action now versus later? So sort of skipping back just a quick second into the financial investment to win, I thought that this four-quadrant criteria might be really useful, and as Vogel mentioned, there'll be a copy of this distributed after the session. But putting into a really acute lens every single pitch that you're going after to determine whether it's something you should truly pursue or not, and if you do decide to pursue it, how much you're willing to invest to win it. So I'll just walk through a couple of examples here. So pitch A, $10 million annual net margin opportunity. This particular organization is willing to invest up to 2% in annual net margin in development cost to win the business, as well as an additional 2% in annual net margin in hard cost to win the business. So that would be considered an A pitch. You meet those criteria, that's the type of investment, that's the level of investment we're going to put toward that pitch. A D pitch, however, something less than $1 million in annual net revenue, they're still willing to make an investment, and you can see that they're not equal. Invest up to 9% in development cost to win it, and 1% in hard cost to win. So the idea of presenting this particular piece or this lens, this financial lens to you guys, is not to find something here to copy necessarily. It's really to take a ruthless approach to how much you're willing to invest to win business. And it'll force you into making some hard decisions and allow you to sort out the real opportunities where you have a right to win versus it'd be nice to win it. So the second piece that I want to talk a little bit about is the internal resource perspective, and really putting the appropriate internal resources together for maximum pitch research and conversion effectiveness. So there's three here that I've listed, the first being business intelligence. This is number one. Do not skimp on getting the right information in front of you and your team, knowing why, through issue impact importance, that the business is actually going into review and what impact you can have. You can use tools like the List and Daily Vista to identify the key business issue, look at their media spend, their existing agency relationships, key decision makers, all key points in really understanding what the opportunity is and who you're going to be presenting to. Number two, organization. certainly the ability to find the best content at the right time for the right pitch. And obviously a platform like Docurated is great for that. But what's also great for is collaboration, leveraging all of those pieces of best content across your team, your partners, and even the prospect or the agency you're going to pitch. It's interesting to see in my experience how often including the prospect in that development of the pitch materials has been so key. So collaboration is certainly number 3 for Scott and I. Now, this is where some of the horror stories really come into it. This is the juicy bit. Scott's going to talk a little bit about 3 scenarios that have where he's got some personal experience in and some stories to share. Certainly from an approach perspective, the show up and throw up, she's not that into you, and of course our favorite, the human hand grenade. So from here I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and looking forward to maybe even hearing him get some sweaty palms along the way.
Hey Dave, thanks so much, and thank you, Fergal. 3 statements before I jump into some of these horror stories. Number 1, you'll quickly notice I'm not Irish or Australian. Number 2, although these are creative and colorful topics, I won't try to be funny because I am not funny. And then thirdly, although this will be a cathartic experience for me because I'll be able to reflect on some of my horror stories, the hope and the plan is that these stories will help you identify similar scenarios in your pursuits and hopefully trigger some of the tactics that I've seen, Dave's seen, the teams that we've worked with have seen that work to overcome them. So, the famous or infamous show up and throw up basically is consistent with a lot of us being very gregarious, sometimes thinking that we're exceptionally brilliant and certainly impassioned as it relates to our product and our company and what we're actually trying to sell. But we simply can't help ourselves in some of these scenarios where we talk too much, we think about ourselves and not the prospect. And certainly, although we're very impassioned and engaged and very focused on presenting our product or service, it typically becomes a long-winded pitch and we ultimately don't get the deal. So one of the ways that I've seen as a very successful tool to avoid showing up and throwing up is simply and sincerely an agenda. Anyone that's worked with me in the past or any of the teams that I've presented to will know that I've used the same agenda probably for the last 20 years in asking folks for introductions, expectations, what is your current state, and then we get into a product discussion and it ends with collaboration and next steps. And although it sounds very, very simplistic, starting an agenda with intros and expectations both prior to the meeting, possibly in an email, and then in the context of a pitch really helps you and probably more importantly your team focus on the most important piece of the puzzle, and that is focusing on your client, focusing on their key business requirements. You can really uncover them very quickly and thoughtfully and also strategically by simply going around the room asking folks to introduce themselves and using that opportunity to ask them about their expectations for the meeting, what would be their ideal outcome, has anything changed since the last time that we met. And in thinking and creating these slides, I couldn't help but think back to my early days in consulting where I think, Dave, I thought I was quite brilliant. And I studied and diligently followed the methodology of the consulting firm I was working for. And that methodology, upon reflection and in the context of this presentation, could be described as the show up and throw up methodology. It focused on having the business development and consultants speak about who we are, what we do, and why we are successful and possibly brilliant at the outset of a meeting. And I always felt a tad uncomfortable with this methodology, but sometimes it would work. Most of the times I was finding that it didn't. And the indelible moment that really brought this home for me is that I was pitching with a full team of folks to a Fortune 100 retailer and brand. And 45 minutes in, the CEO simply looked me dead in the eye and said, you haven't said anything about us, you haven't asked me any questions, and he up and left the room. So hopefully this horror story helps you all. It certainly has helped me, and I never go into a meeting, my teams never go into a meeting without first starting with an agenda. The second scenario or fail that I've seen throughout my career, and I think our teams have seen, is that, as David mentioned earlier, he or she is just not that into you. Now, I don't want to get too personal here. This could sometimes apply to my personal life. I'll keep it focused on professional side, Dave, but oftentimes this is called a tease, and it simply speaks about your prospect going dark, non-responsive to emails or voicemails or any type of effort that you make to try and re-engage or reconnect with that person. And certainly in the context of a presentation, there are some prospects that simply are so apathetic or disinterested, they will look at their mobile device or their laptop and they simply don't pay any attention to you. And you know when you're in that room or you're not getting the response to an email that the relationship is just slipping away. Some of the things, again, very simple things that you can employ to get that prospect either back engaged or qualified out is simply asking questions. You know, be courageous as a business development person. If you find that folks are in the room not focused or are totally disengaged, ask them about it. Ask them if it is a priority. Ask them if this is a good time to have this meeting or this discussion. Sometimes it's those courageous questions that you ask, and you know, as I state here, keep calm and ask questions, helps you get back on track, or again, qualifies out an opportunity. And one of the things that I'll share with the group here that, you know, some of my sales folks that are on the phone will probably roll their eyes, but I never want to be in the world of maybe. You know, a no is almost as good as a yes, but it's the world of maybe that makes our world so stressful and gives us those sweaty palms. The other thing to think about in this scenario is, you know, with all relationships, it's about the communication. So if I've been consistently speaking to someone via email or via phone, I try to mix it up. I'll send a thoughtful note, a thank you note. I may even FedEx something to the decision maker, and I'd say I've got about a 90% hit rate on when I FedEx something to a decision maker, I will get a response. And then finally, something that you know, Alex Gorbanski and I talked about in our consulting experiences is the takeaway. You know, if someone is disinterested, they're not engaging, they're non-responsive, you know, simply break up with them before they break up with you. You know, execute the takeaway, do it professionally, take the proposal away, or simply withdraw your candidacy for the pursuit. I'm pretty confident you'll get a response, or again, you'll get to know that isn't the ideal response, but it's better than a maybe. You know, one of the examples that I've got from my past is that we did an exceptional job closing an online travel brand. It was a long-standing strategic relationship, fantastic people, and it was such a great relationship that they introduced us to another one of their big brands under their umbrella. And I was introduced to the brand and the agency that was running the process, and it certainly showed up. There were countless flights and travel expenses, but along the way, what I found upon reflection is that the agency really wasn't engaged with me or the team. We actually got stood up a couple times when we were expecting 5 executives in the room and only 2 were there. And I would humbly say I really relied on my pre-existing relationships to try and draft off that to get this sister brand. And what I was rewarded with and what the team was rewarded with was basically $20,000 in expenses in no sale, and I'm happy to say that I kept my job. The third and final scenario is one that, you know, Dave and I have joked about, and Fergal and I had a lot of fun creating, and that is the human hand grenade. And basically the human hand grenade is someone typically not the decision maker. They're involved in the decision making process, but they always wait for the ideal perfect time to roll that hand grenade under your table or presentation to totally blow it up. You know, they're oftentimes interested in another competitor. They've probably been involved in the previous decision for the incumbent. There are multiple different motivations here, but you know, the human hand grenade can really be an issue if you don't proactively manage it, and if you do manage it by prior to the meeting or prior to the pitch, a very simple email asking about who's going to be in the room, what are their titles, what are their expectations, and understand that from the outset. Also, validate, what is the decision-making process from the get-go. Who's going to be in charge in this decision-making process, and why are they involved in the process, and then really lean on the decision maker or the trusted party that you're working with. There's a lot on the line, not only for you and that individual. So I found that if you're really good at developing that trusting strategic relationship, you can really collaborate with that individual to smoke out those folks that are there to try and distract you or blow up your presentation. And then at the beginning of the pitch, I talked earlier about the agenda. If you always checkpoint, because there may be new players that come into the room, or there may be folks that pop in midway or midstream, I always make it a habit, not only of myself but my teams, to ask for introductions, ask for expectations, ask if anything has changed. And a lot of times you won't totally avoid the human hand grenade, but it can really mitigate and diffuse the damage. And one of my famous, or again, one of my infamous experiences from the past, and I think Fergal and Dave had a lot of fun with this one earlier. And many of you may know of a very large software company on the West Coast that really don't believe in having titles published on business cards, etc. And I got a very a simple inbound email from an individual who I misassumed was middle or low on the totem pole, asking if, while I was in Seattle meeting with some other folks, I shouldn't have given the geography, would I come by and pop in and meet with her and the team. And prior to this presentation, and very inconsistent with what I have done to be successful and my team successful, I didn't do any research and really didn't do much work to uncover who the folks were in the room, their roles, responsibilities, expectations, etc. And I certainly, literally, my palms were sweating, and I probably had sweat across my brow when I got into the room, because there were 10 or 12 people very, very interested in hearing what I and the team had to say. And it was a perfect opportunity for the technical naysayer or leader, who, if I can digress for a moment, Dave, would actually wince as I spoke. So if you see wincing in the room, that's a telltale sign that it might be a human hand grenade. But certainly this individual saw the opportunity, reinforced a perceived technical deficiency, and at the time we were blown out of the water. 3 or 4 months later, we were able to re-engage at a different side of the business, and ultimately we did secure the engagement. But it was a painful lesson, and hopefully a horror story that the folks on this line will avoid going forward. So, Dave, I feel much better. I feel I've gotten that all off my chest, and hopefully the folks on the line can learn from this and avoid some of my horror stories and employ some of these tactics to have much more successful pitches.
Scott, I was as you're going through this, it certainly reminded me of a couple that in the same type of vein I've experienced, and I think some of these factors have helped mitigate some of those issues. And I think it really comes down to, as you mentioned, sort of consolidating all that into being prepared for the pitch from day one. So I thought I'd just talk through a little bit about the areas in which we've covered today or this morning. Certainly getting an understanding of the criteria, what you're really going into, what's the environment that you really want to create, and how can you gain as much control over the pitch as possible. Really, it's what it comes down to, sort of that leverage of preparation and control over as many of the variables as you can. Certainly from the pitch criteria standpoint, understanding the financial opportunity both now and in the future, to then weigh up your financial investment in pursuing the business to a win. I talked a little bit about at the outset about really diving in and making sure that you understand the key issue of the business is looking to solve, and either have it known or certainly assume through the work that you've done with like-type companies or like-type agencies. The second piece of that, the impact, and more so the impact on their business of inaction. So really starting to build and formulate up the ability to drive the importance of then taking action now versus later. The second area that we sort of talked a little bit about was internal resources and the appropriate internal resources to gain the maximum level of research and to move you through that level of conversion effectiveness. And there were three areas there that I mentioned. One, business intelligence, making sure that you really do understand the issue, impact, importance of the business issue. That maybe it comes down to things like their media spend, their agency and brand relationships, the key decision makers in the room, Scott, that you mentioned a couple of times. The ability to stay organized, and I think staying organized certainly gives you a great degree of control. The ability to find the best content, surface that at the right time for the team, and collaborate across your team, your partners, and potentially even the prospects. Certainly, we all enjoyed the approach side of things. The show up and throw up, she's not that into you, and the human hand grenade, certainly still my favorite. And then therefore, sort of in conclusion, this is really about creating your right to win. Knowledge and organization certainly builds your confidence. Not only your confidence, perhaps as the pitch lead, but those who are participating in with you. We've got a lot of pitch type title leaders on the call today. This is the type of training that I would highly recommend you undertake with your team prior to walking into the room and presenting in front of your audience. I am a big believer that you certainly want to practice on your team internally before the big day, and that there really is no B team that should ever be put in front of a client. That's a personal piece. You should always lead with the A team. Ultimately, it helps you avoid those epic pitch fails that we've likely all experienced, and therefore the sweaty palms moving forward. This has been the first of what will become a series of webcasts for Docurated on the list, talking through sales enablement. And we've set up the next session for Tuesday, September 23rd, so about a month from now, and there'll be an email invitation to follow. So I'm going to hand the session key back to you to lead a discussion, and I think that there is certainly the ability to ask questions in the chat section of the web menu.
Dave, thank you. Scott, thank you. Guys, this is fantastic. We got a good few questions that have been submitted by our audience, and please feel free to submit more questions. The first question we got is, can I get the slides? Yes, you can. The slides and a recording of this entire session will be emailed out to everybody later on today. Another interesting question we got, I think this could be either similar to or a net new scenario, Dave and Scott. Somebody is asking, what are ways to handle the prospect that teases you or just keeps stringing you along?
Scott, you want to pick that one up first, or would you like me to go?
Sure. I definitely, that one is near and dear to my heart, Fergal. I mentioned in the presentation to break up before you get broken up with, and I think with someone who's, quote, teasing you at the outset, you got to test that prospect to make sure that they're serious. Something that we do and we employ here at Docurated is that we'll get an interested party and we will ask them to fill out a host of criteria questions up front before we do a meeting or a demo or make any type of, to what Dave articulated in the presentation, any type of financial investment. And we found that the folks that fill it out in detail are indeed serious about speaking to us, and those that don't, we refuse on most occasions to not have the meeting or the demonstration. So that's one simple way that we're avoiding that, quote, teasing scenario. Dave, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I certainly would agree with that, Scott. One of the simplest things that we've employed here at the list is just trying to get to the truth as quickly as possible. And sometimes that truth has changed or tipped since we last spoke with a prospect or since we pitched. However, it really comes down to one question, and that to us means, has the scale tipped, and do you want it more than they do? And I believe that if you want the business more than they want the solution, you're always going to be in that position of losing control of the situation. And the second part of that is if they're willing to spend time with you, then they're willing to spend the dollars with you. So that can be a key indicator from right up front whether a prospect that you're pitching is really serious about finding a solution to this. It's to proactively get time and to one of Scott's horror stories, just finding that if they're becoming no-shows and so forth, it's giving you the indicators, and maybe it's time to reevaluate whether the truth that they're maybe just not that into you anymore.
Guys, thank you. Good answers. Here's another question that I think is very interesting, and for everybody in the audience as well. Sorry if we don't get to all these questions today, but I'm going to make sure that Dave and Scott see all of them and that we can respond to you individually if we don't get to it on the line. Scott, this is for you. How can you find out if you were just the number 2 challenger in a process behind your prospect's hidden first choice?
That's a great question. Usually Dave talks about the truth, and I really like that approach. I talked about testing people at the outset, and the root of that question is so good because sophisticated buyers will have number 1 and 2 chasing against each other quite closely, so that they don't know whether they're number 1 or number 2. And what I've seen, Fergal, in my experience, is it comes down a lot to the economics in drilling into the details of that, where you really start to dig into what is the ROI that they're going to see in using the application, what and how are they actually evaluating the cost and the investment. And I'm not saying that it's ideal or the silver bullet, but it's been those discussions around getting started and actually consummating the deal that you find out, or I found out quite quickly, whether I'm a number 1 or number 2. And secondly, I think David's point about folks making the investment to meet with you, I think that carries out through the process and has also helped me see if I was a number 1 or number 2, because if you have an engaged individual who, as Dave said, wants the deal as much as you do, those individuals are going to want to collaborate, whether it be over coffee or drinks or dinner. And it's those sessions that have really helped me carry the day, or, Fergal, and answer the question, smoke out the fact that I'm not number 1, I'm either 2 or 3. I hope that's helpful.
I've got a couple of questions that I've used for a number of years to figure that out, and I was just sort of jotting some stuff down as you were speaking there. I think one of the ones that has been most effective is getting right to that truth point again by asking a question like, what do you love about your front runner in this process? And I specifically aimed the question at potentially even the person who might be the biggest hand grenade, because they'll be passionate in responding to what they love about their front runner. And then you're number 2 or further down the chain. Because if it's you, they say, well, we just love your solution. If they do go down that process, I'll always ask the next question, which is, well, what's missing? If we could do all of those things and the thing that's missing, is that enough to tip the scale to us? Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more, Dave. I think we both employ across our teams asking those courageous questions, and those questions and Fergal simply saying, hey, am I number 1 or number 2 or number 3, that's been very helpful as well in my past.
Thanks, guys. Dave, I want to direct this one to you because I think us in marketing could be partly responsible for this. So, marketing has given...
You're going to fall on the sword here, Fergal?
So most of my presentations, are an overview of my company and our company's capabilities. And it's a PowerPoint deck with 15 to 18 slides that have been given to me by marketing, and they tell me I have to go through this deck. So how can I maximize my client's interest without throwing up so much by just talking to the slides all the time?
That's a great question. People like to meet with people, not with PowerPoint. And I think it's true across all types of relationships. People are generally much more interested to talk about themselves than they are of someone else. I think if you can take the very simple concept of just asking the right questions and then appropriately demonstrating how your company or your solution is the right fit to be considered as part of a solution to that problem, it's a much more engaging type of conversation than simply just showing up and throwing up those 10 to 15 slides and then asking questions about the prospect. Over the years, it's been the bigger opportunities have come when we've dug into an area which may not have been covered in the slides themselves because there's only so much content you can put up there. So I always try and leave the slides to a secondary default in the back pocket. If it's a rare circumstance where the prospect just isn't willing to divulge anything about themselves, I'll use the slides in conjunction with telling stories about clients of their type where they've experienced this type of problem, and then asking whether they're experiencing that type of thing or is that starting to resonate. So it all depends on I think, knowing your audience, number one. A lot of people are classically trained to expect a provider, an ad tech solution, or a media company to come into an agency and just present. But if you can take control of that environment and that scenario and flip it, you'll be much more successful.
Dave, thank you. Scott, I want to direct this next question to you. This is a question, I think, around your meeting management or your meeting tactics. So you've made, the introductions have been made, okay? And are there specific, Scott, intro questions that you ask to the people in the room even before you get into your slides?
Oh, certainly. It's as simple as, can you provide an introduction? What is your role and responsibilities? How are you involved in this engagement? What is the expectation for this? What is your expectation, specific and selfish expectation for this meeting based on your roles and responsibilities? Has anything changed since the last time that we've spoken? And certainly as it relates to uncovering what their roles and responsibilities are, there's a whole host of follow-on questions as to, hey, what is the technological strategy around this engagement, or what is the sales organization's perspective around this initiative, and so it starts very simple, and then it expands to much more specific based on the constituency that you're speaking to when you're going around the room. And I was thinking about one other tactic that, and Dave made me think about it when you were talking about the slides. Certainly checkpointing those expectations will allow you and the team to recalibrate what are the most important and most compelling slides to present. It also will help you recalibrate and focus on those parts of your application or your services that would be most compelling to the prospect. But a third thing, and I know Dave has done this, and I've done it, and it's really impactful in those meetings, is to get to the whiteboard and probably some of the folks that have worked for me in the past are laughing, but to get someone in front of the whiteboard and help them envision their project and how it fits within their technology strategy or in their their business unit strategy becomes a much more collaborative and engaged process. And you really find out if that prospect is really interested in exploring the value of your services in your platform, if they're sincerely interested in mapping it out for you on a whiteboard. And with the advent of these technology devices that my team sometimes jokes about me not knowing how to use, you can take a photo of that whiteboard and really use it through the process. That makes it pretty compelling. So Fergal, hopefully I answered it, and I'm not burning oxygen here.
Scott, that's very good. This is a really interesting question. It's something that I didn't know. So one of our audience members tells us that in digital ad sales, they will typically only get 30 minutes for a meeting. And so when you think about it, and you go into the room and you do your introductions and kind of chit-chat around relationship building, 20 minutes could be gone. So, you've only 10 minutes left, and that becomes very difficult then around discussing their needs. So, Dave, I'd like to give this one to you.
Sure.
What suggestions do you have there around when you just get 30 minutes for a digital ad sales meeting?
Military-type precision is absolutely key, and having a plan with Scott's earlier point of an agenda to go in there with, making sure that a lot of the work, a lot of the relationship building, common ground can be done through other communication channels other than FaceTime, because that FaceTime is just so important. So making sure that before you go in, you truly have clarity on the issue at hand. If you can't figure that out, it's going to take 15, 20 minutes for them to describe the issue to you face-to-face. So whatever you can do to preempt and prepare for the meeting is going to be absolutely key. Certainly be reminded of the impact that this is going to have on their client, because typically, I guess, if you're in the digital ad sales model here, you're either client direct or you're at the agency. So it's slightly different models. How it empowers the agency to help their client, or how it empowers and solves the problem for the client directly is slightly different. But so be reminded of the impact and put it as part of the agenda, and make sure that you've got a mutual understanding of the timeline that's in place for that sense of urgency. Then that 30 minutes really should just be the plan to solve the problem. This is you re-clarifying in the first 5 minutes the issue, the impact, and the importance. So you've already done away with, you've already done intros very quickly and found some common ground over email or a call, pre-call perhaps. So you're really just concentrating on the problem at hand, the issue, the impact, the importance. This is your 5 minutes to then your plan to solve it. Go back and do the 360 of, does that sound like the plan that is as part of your expectations? Have them start to own that by asking questions on it, or preemptively ask them questions on it. That's the way that I've been most successful in seeing our clients in the ad sales space lock down those 30 minutes. And it really has to be the dividing of minutes into those military-type precision pieces of agenda or an agenda.
Very good answer, Dave. We're coming up to 15 minutes to the hour. There's one more question that I want to put out to both Dave and Scott. Guys, what are your thoughts on lunch and learn invites by agencies?
I've been part of a number of these. I think that they can be a good use of time if you've got the ability to get a really good understanding of who the audience participants are going to be. So sometimes it depends on who's setting it up and what the agenda is going to be. I'm a big believer in sessions like this of putting yourself out there into the market and talking to the market to help them accomplish whatever it is that they're looking to accomplish. I think with that comes a great degree of brand representation and the opportunity that may come along in the future. It's more of a marketing and brand position to me than a sales opportunity. So one is understand the audience. Two is understand the agenda, and are you looking to educate or sell? I think if education is your primary, education and brand are your primary drivers, then go for it. If it's to look at a conversion rate to customer, probably better avenues to take.
Yeah, and Fergal, I'd be a little redundant with Dave. I agree with what he said. You know, we've seen some pretty phenomenal results for lunch and learns for existing customers. So I agree with Dave that there's a marketing and education are the primarily the key things of lunch and learns in my experience. Potentially gets a little bit more weighty if you do it with existing customers, and you can reflect on the pre-existing engagement that you have and the value that you're driving.
Thank you, Scott. Dave, Scott, thank you for your time today. To our audience, thank you so much for participating. Thank you for your great questions. I hope as well that you were going to join us again on Tuesday, September 23rd. I, for one, really enjoyed this 45 minutes. I will follow up with you all later on today with the recording and with the slides. And on the screen, you've got Dave and Scott's contact details too. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us with any questions that you have. Thank you all again. Goodbye.
Thanks very much, Scott. Thanks very much, Fergal.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Fergal.
Thanks. Bye.